Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Giant Pod with me, Andy Wrintmore. My guest this week is Tony Martin. Tony is one of the head honchos at Celestial Drones, creating Sky Theatre using an abundance of drones and some very, very sophisticated software. We go into the details of how they're about to change the game in signage and in the touring musical world and the art space in general. We talk about when he was the president of Sony Europe on a six-figure salary with drivers and assistants and the crazy kind of lifestyle that brings. But before that, we talk about him being Nick Cave's sound and lighting engineer. We talk about his time with a art rock German outfit type thing. We talk about his time hanging out with everyone at Factory Records. We talk about the textural sophistication of Billie Eilish's debut album. And the rest is really a freewheeling chat. Tony has lived a incredible rock and roll life, highs and lows. We talk about driving through France at 3 a.m. in a pickup truck to go in, like a tow truck, to go and recover a camper van from a sort of a failed or abandoned business venture. There's all kinds of things in this podcast. I thought it was really cool. What a life story. So yeah, without further ado, here it is, Tony Martin. So yeah, obviously what we're talking about here is Celestial, which is your like you said, your startup, which is about sort of Sky. What would you call it? Sky Theatre? What's the sort of the wording that you're using?
What do I think Celestial is? That's changed since we started the company. We coined this phrase early on, which is, welcome to Sky Theatre. We wanted to create a new entertainment paradigm, right? We wanted to be somewhere in between, a fireworks display, a music event, a gig, an artistic kind of piece. We wanted to create art in the sky. And one of the kind of watchwords, or one of the sentences we always, talk about, is like drawing down the stars from the night sky to create a shared sense of wonder. Uh-huh. So we want to, that's kind of one of the phrases that we keep rolling out over and over again. So we wanted to create something new that is technology enabled, but creativity led. And so when we're talking to new clients, there are a few other companies in the world right now that can do drone displays. That not many, but there are quite a few. When you look at it on a global basis, but actually, when you think about what we do, we always talk about being creatively led and kind of narrative led. And that we are a collection of creatives that are enabled by technology, as opposed to what we think some of our competitors do, which is kind of being led by technology. And so one of the things we've always tried to steer clear of is something we call logo wear. And logo wear is where a drone company will just put up basically the client logo in the air and maybe a few words, and or maybe they'll just go for a world record. Maybe they'll put 3,000 drones up in the air or whatever, right? Mm. So we're not about that. What we want to do is be evocative. We want to leave a lasting impression. We want to give people a reason to super distribute via social media and other mechanisms, what they have seen. And you can only do that if you touch people emotionally, right? As opposed to just, a VW logo in the sky. That's not really very compelling, we don't think.
No, it seems a bit... It's like a bit cheap, and it's like lazy PR stunting, isn't it? It's just a bit like, yeah. That was an interesting phrase that you used then, super distributing. Is that, don't be afraid to use all the jargon and the lingo in this, because I'm going to ask you about it. I want to learn about it. Tell me what super distributing is. It's basically, I guess, it's free PR, isn't it?
Well, super distribution is giving people sufficient incentive because of the quality of the work or the level of engagement for them to be able to share it with their friends. So, that can be via social media, or it can be down at the pub or it can be, you know, writing a letter to the Times. It can be anything. All of those things in concert are super distribution. And it's a phrase that we coined a long time ago at Sony Music, when we were kind of developing the new technology strategy for that record label. And it's something that's just stayed with me. And it kind of goes beyond just social media. It's just everything to do. It's that incentive to tell the story on your behalf and on your client's behalf.
Right. Interesting. So we're touching on a few things here, and I think maybe we should rewind and build our way up to it. So tell me where did you grow up? What was it like when you were? What was your sort of dream and aspiration when you were young?
I had a really weird kind of upbringing. I was adopted by my dad's parents. I was adopted by my grandparents on my father's side, and you know that. And I grew up in Torquay. So, and I'm also
just saying the word. Yeah. I've played in Torquay, and yeah, I know.
Have you? Okay.
Yeah, I go to Torquay to see things, see things happen.
Honestly, it drove me crazy. Anyway, look, the thing is, I was brought up by old people. Bless them, they did as good a job as they could possibly do. But when I got to my mid-teens, that was very frustrating. I was in various punk bands because that's the age I am. You know,
tell me about these punk bands.
Yeah, well, in 1976, I was 16 years old. Right?
You were not 16 in
15 years old.
You were 15 in 1976.
Yeah. So, and actually, Andy, you know, we sort of laugh at Torquay, but actually at that point in time, Torquay was actually on the gig circuit, and the Torquay Town Hall was a kind of a 2,000 standing audience venue, right?
Right.
That's quite a nice club size. So you'd have Buzzcocks, you'd have Sex Pistols, you'd have The Damned, you'd have all of those bands coming to play. And it was a girlfriend of mine's dad who was the promoter.
Right.
So that was amazing. You know, we were always getting tickets to go to all of these gigs, but also more importantly, we were getting opportunities in our rubbish little punk band to support some of those bands as they came through.
Yeah.
And that was a double-edged sword, because some of the bands that came through at that time were still like, there was the whole prog rock thing that was still going on, you know. So I remember being in a really crap punk band. I don't know why they're called this, but they were called Day On Beat. I don't really know why.
Right.
We've never really gotten to the bottom of that, you know, whatever, 40 years later. But we got a support. That one of the most abiding memories of doing a concert at Torquay Town Hall for me was that we got a support slot for the Enid, like a prog rock band called the Enid. I don't know if you've ever heard of them.
I have not heard of them.
Anyway, they were big, right? They were big. They were bearded. They were big. They were, you know, they were in the same kind of space as Hawkwind and all of those bands, right?
Yeah.
So we were supporting the Enid. They were a bunch of prog rockers. There were 2,000 fucking hippies sitting on the floor in front of us as we came onto the stage. And it was silence. No one, you know, acknowledged. It was really ridiculous. We were this crap punk band playing in front of a prog rock audience of 2,000 people who, after about 7 minutes, just started throwing stuff at us. And after about 8 minutes, you know, members of the Enid were coming on stage to try and shepherd us off the stage. And then after about 9 minutes, I think our drummer, this guy Den, I've got this vivid memory of turning around and seeing Den holding the beard of one of the Enid and having a kind of tussle with him on the stage in this, like, to and fro with this beard holding. So there were hails of bottles and a fight on stage with the Enid to try and get rid of us. Anyway. So that, you know, I was in various punk bands, and it was a weird place because I grew up with old people. Torquay is renowned for being a retirement town. So I got more and more wound up being there, and especially because I was kind of starting to be involved with music. I just had to get out of there. I got in all sorts of trouble because after punk, I kind of became a scooter boy, and I was riding around on scooters in a big scooter gang and all of that stuff. And not to put too fine a point on it, I got in lots of trouble, which resulted in, you know, police and court and all of that stuff.
Oh, wow.
And I was glad when a friend of mine mounted what we would call now an intervention. And I was at the tail end of that trouble, and he came to see me and he's like, listen, if you stay in Torquay, you're going to die. So I suggest because you're just going to get involved in loads of really horrible stuff, and you're going to die of boredom or frustration or all of the other things that can make you die when you're a teenager, you will do. So he said, move to Manchester with me. He already had a place in Manchester. He was in his final year of a course in Manchester, and he was writing his dissertation on factory records.
Right.
And that was great because every band I loved and almost every album I owned at that point in time was on factory.
Right.
So there were bands like Section 25 and A Certain Ratio and Joy Division, which obviously turned into New Order and all of that stuff. That was all like on my radar, and I loved that stuff. I could really relate to that stuff. God knows how, from being in Torquay, how that music coming out of the centre of Manchester could influence me, but it really did. And I took him up on his offer, and I went from seaside retirement town of Torquay and just parachuted straight into Moss Side in Manchester in the early 80s, when it was at its most deprived, it was at its most ghettoized. There were a lot of very, very poor people there. All of that stuff was amazing to me because I hadn't seen any of that stuff because I grew up in Torquay, right? So what seemed to be scary to most people, you kept hearing this commentary about, Moss Side being, how rough it was and all of this stuff. It was just invisible to me. The great thing was that within a month, I was living next door to and interacting with all of the bands that I loved because my friend was writing his college dissertation on factory records. He had befriended all of the bands. He then introduced me to all of the bands. I then got introduced to factory records, and that kind of started that was a springboard to my whole kind of musical career, because guess what? Less than a year after I moved to Manchester, Factory decided to open what became a world-renowned club called the Hacienda.
Yes.
And the Hacienda was a really, really big deal. It was a really big transformative thing for me. For a start, it was a remarkable venue. It didn't look like any other club in the world. It was all red velveteen and gold in those days. When you used to go into a nightclub, it was sticky carpets and red velveteen and kind of, horrible lighting and mirrors everywhere and stuff. And this was the antithesis of that. It was grey painted floors. It was hazard stripes on girders. It was, all of these different elements from an industrial landscape had been shoehorned into a club environment. And it was, again, for a couple of thousand people, it was just an amazing place to be. And in those early days, there were seven bands a week playing there. Every night it was open. Sometimes, most of the time, there was probably more staff than punters there. It was empty because no one could get their head around this amazing roster of artists that they had coming through.
Right.
Everything from Devo to Madonna, everything in between, right?
Yeah.
But here's the thing, because I got to know the label and because I had a kind of a head start over all of my mates who were still in Torquay, when my friends did come up, I would just swan around the Hacienda with them like I owned the place, right? And I'd be like, oh yeah, this is so-and-so, this is Ginger, he's the manager, this is Leslie, she runs the bars, this is so-and-so, he does the lighting. And then the guy that was doing the lighting I've forgotten his name, unfortunately, but anyway, he was probably my age that I am now. He hated it. He hated being there. He hated these stupid, weird alternative bands that were playing. He hated the music that was being DJ'd. He hated it. So when I said to him, I can do that if you want, he was on his lighting desk, and I just said, so what's that? What's this? And within minutes, I sort of understood the concept of a lighting desk. So when my friends came from Torquay, I'd be like, "Hey, come on, let's go up to the lighting room. We can just hang out there." And I started doing the lighting for the club sections when he didn't want to do it. And then he said, "Oh, do you want to do the support bands when bands are playing?" I was like, "Yeah, okay." And about a couple of weeks later, I got a call from management, and they brought me down to the office and said, "Listen, we've had some complaints about the lighting for the support bands." I was like, "Oh, right." And I just thought, okay, that's that. And they said, "Listen, it appears that the main bands are pissed off because the lighting for the support bands is better than the lighting for the main band." So I was like, "Oh,
that's
okay."
Such a headliner thing to do, isn't it? It's so
such a
Spinal
funny
Tap. Yeah, why are their lights better than ours?
Yeah,
Someone
exactly.
talk to the management. We can't have them having better lights than us.
Well, it worked to my advantage because what happened was they said, so we're sacking the lighting guy. You're now the lighting guy. I was like, oh. So all of a sudden I had to know about patch bays and DMX and dimmers and all of these bits. And then I had to learn how to, tail 450 volt, 3-phase, 60 amp electrics onto a rig and all of this stuff. I learned that stuff very quickly. But then...
Who taught you that?
I don't know. I don't know how.
You just sort of figured it out, right?
Yeah, because there were PA guys coming in all the time with sound systems and stuff, and I just picked stuff up. And then I had to kind of work with local lighting companies because we had to buy supplies. And I guess I just saw, how do you do this? What happens if I touch 450 volts? That kind of thing. And so they taught me all of that stuff. But within maybe 6 months of doing bands as they came through the Hacienda, I started to get offers to go on tour with various bands. And, I did lighting for everyone from Madonna to U2 to this to that, loads of bands. And then,
are we just going to gloss over that? Are we?
Yeah, but I didn't do very big tours with those, but I did get some European gigs from all of those kind of big names.
How big are these guys at this time when they're offering you the?
Well, by way of example, the gig that Madonna did at the Hacienda, she did on a TV show called The Tube,
right?
And it was her first ever appearance in the UK.
Okay,
and she was performing Holiday. It was her first or second single.
So these aren't the artists that we now know as Madonna and U2 asking you at this time.
No, not at all.
Okay.
But I mean, U2 was still pretty big, but they'd had half a dozen hit singles and stuff because they've been going like forever, right? But I did bits and pieces, the Waterboys and all of these other bands. But then, weirdly, an avant-garde German band turned up called Einstürzende Neubauten.
Favorite band, I love them.
Right, Einstürzende Neubauten, for people that don't know, is it translates as collapsing new buildings.
That is great.
They had a reputation for using power tools at various venues and basically wreaking havoc. So all of this noisy concrete mixers, pneumatic drills, grinders, drills, all of these things, right, formed part of the ensemble. And they ended up putting a big Kango, one of these big drills, into the wall of the Hacienda, and all of this stuff happened.
Yeah.
And but I did, I really sort of liked what they were doing, so I gave them lighting that matched what they did. This chaotic, high contrast lighting that I managed to do. And I ended up touring with those guys for years and years and years, and I loved it. I spent a lot of time in Eastern Europe because of that. West Berlin was still West Berlin when I first started working with those guys, which was a remarkable place.
What year are we in at this point?
We're probably in 82, 83.
Right.
Around that time. So it was really brilliant. It was ahead of, the wall coming down in Berlin. But incidentally, because I was with Neubauten, we played a gig in West Berlin the night the wall came down. Oh. And we had the mayor of East Berlin and the mayor of West Berlin at Hansa, which is right next, it's a big venue and recording studio that David Bowie did loads of stuff in, right next to the Berlin Wall. And it happened then. And it was just an amazing place to be. So,
wow.
Neubauten was a relatively obscure thing, but they did relatively high profile gigs because they were deemed to be art, not music, right? So we'd be invited over to, Canada, and there would be a civic reception, and the mayor of Toronto would invite us, and it was all black tie, and we'd turn up in this leather and kind of hair everywhere and kind of, looking completely disgraceful, but we got invited to all of these things, and it was great. Now, this kind of segues a little bit because the guy that was their singer, a guy called Blixer Bargeld, ended up being the guitarist for Nick Cave, and so he then introduced me to Nick, and then I started touring with Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, and again, I had lots of other stuff going on in the background, but I enjoyed being with those guys so much that whether I was running another company or doing music or whatever, I carried on working with Nick Cave for quite a long time because they were just remarkable people, talented people, and I really loved being with them. Anyway, all of that happened. Shall I shut up or shall I carry on?
No, man, carry on. No, this is great. Mate, the most I had to add was about 10 minutes ago, and I was going to talk about when I was in Torquay playing a show last. Next door was a ladies' night at some club thing, and I could just see loads of blokes showing up having bought bloody whipped cream and shit, and that was it. That's all I had. Don't worry. You're good. You carry on.
It's too sordid. It's too much.
It's like, Ben, is that Squirt? Did they just buy Squirt?
Did they just do that?
So let's say you're with Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, legendary band. Boatman's Call, Murder Ballads, all that stuff. Are you there?
All of that stuff.
Are you there for that period?
Yeah, all of that. So now when I hear that stuff, I know because I've been to so many hundreds of gigs with those guys, I know every song note for note. I know every nuance, and became really quite close with Nick. And then we lost touch, and then we got back in touch again because I ended up living in Brighton and he moved to Brighton. So I was really happy about that. And then while I was doing all that stuff in the background, I started a new tech or a new media agency, New Media as it was called then, digital agency it'd be called now. And we started, because I had my own recording studio. I've missed out a bit, sorry. While I was touring, I was earning good money, but I was out of the country for 6 months a year. And that meant that when I got back to the UK, I had money in my pocket, which would allow me to continue to write rubbish music. But the rubbish music gradually got better.
What genre are we in?
Okay, so now, I've always been obsessed with technology. That's the one thread that runs through all of my careers, right? What happened was that as I was messing around with technology and I was at the Hacienda and the dance music revolution started in late 85, early 86, I had all of this kind of technology available to me because I've been able to fund it through being a lighting guy and being on tour with various people. So I started to kind of create studios and, started to produce music. And then we had a great moment where my girlfriend at the time, a girl called Debbie Turner, she was really good mates with Alan McGee at Creation Records. And she invited Alan up to the Hacienda, right? It was a big night. It was hands in the air, 2,000 people, everyone on a pill. It was absolutely insane all the time. It was like that 3 or 4 times a week at the Hacienda. So Alan came up, and Creation at the time was, a bit of a shoegazer kind of label. It was a bit indie rock. They didn't really have anything to do with dance music at all. And Alan came up, spent a couple of nights with us, went out to the Hacienda. He took ecstasy for the first time, discovered it. This is all, by the way, in a biopic that's just about to be released about Alan McGee called Creation Stories, right?
I was going to mention that. His Instagram is hilarious. Have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
It's just pictures of him in tracksuits, like stood somewhere, just looking a bit...
That's about the strength of it, yeah.
Looking a bit clueless. It's hilarious.
He came up to Hacienda. He managed to procure the necessary chemicals to get him on a dance floor. And he had the most revelatory time of his life. He couldn't believe that an atmosphere could be so warm, so engaging, so completely locked on to a groove.
Yeah.
That it was like those dance floors. Nowadays you kind of, lots of people kind of holding their phones and they're doing selfies while they're on the dance floor and all of that stuff. Back at that era, everyone was wearing baggy clothes. Everyone was wearing clothes that they were work clothes, right? It was clothes that you could dance in for 18 hours straight if you needed to. Yeah. And so that's what a dance floor, it was like one organism pulsing to music for, hours and hours at a time. Anyway, he had an amazing time. And at the end of it was like, man, I want to make dance music. I want to make fucking dance music. That's I can't do a Scottish accent, so I'm not going to attempt it. But, and Debbie was like, well, Tony, does dance music. And he was like, right, I want to hear what you're doing, all of this stuff. Anyway, I went down to London and we threw a few ideas around. And, at that point we thought, let's set up a new dance label, and I was going to kind of do this dance label thing with him. And let's call it Chemical. Let's call it Chemical Records. And he sat with that idea for a bit, and it was like, no, man, I'm going to do it all on Creation. Let's do it all on Creation. By the way, there's this band Primal Scream, and they really want to make dance records, and you can turn a fucking computer on. Why don't you help them? So I was like, okay. And at that time, I think he'd signed me to the label with a co-writer that I was working with called Martin Mittler. And we signed to Creation under the name Hypnotone. And we'd just done our first album with them. And, I got introduced to Primal Scream. And I started working with the guitarist Andrew Innes. And we created Screamadelica. And so we sort of got involved.
What do you mean? Hang on, wait. Hang on a minute.
You don't know any of this, do you, Andy?
No, I don't know any of this shit. Hang on, wait. So, what? Hang on. When you say you created Screamadelica, can you just expand on that for me? Because I've got that next door. I've got that in my CD rack next door. So let's.
Right.
I mean, everyone has it.
Yeah, a lot of people have got it.
Yeah.
Right? So they did. Those guys didn't know how to turn on a computer. They didn't know how to make beats. They didn't know how to write bass lines with keyboards. They didn't know how to program drums. They didn't know how to make samples. So in the same way that I've been working with my co-writer for Hypnotone, Martin Mittler, I got locked in a council flat with Andrew Innes. He was kind of one of the main songwriters of Primals and guitarist. And so we had a couple of racks of samplers and a bunch of keyboards, and I took a load of Hypnotone kit down to him. And so we had, sequencers and a couple of computers and samplers and keyboards and percussion. And we started to pull together the album, or the fundamental building blocks for what the album would become. And then that got kind of taken into the studio. Carried on doing bits and pieces with them in there. And then, others got involved, people like, Andy Wrintmore and all of the others got involved as well. I did it on a kind of work for hire basis. So I was really happy because I was earning quite a lot of money from those guys. And actually I had my wages from Creation, and then I had all of the fees that I was charging Primal Scream to do this album, Screamadelica, right?
What were you charging them?
Oh yeah, it's like £500 a day or something, but it's not much money now when you think about how many records it sold and stuff. But at the time, it was a real lot of money because I was also on wages, and Primals were earning nothing. Right?
So this was all getting billed to McGee, is it?
Yeah, I was getting paid by Creation, which was brilliant. And so I had a sports car, and I was driving up and down from Manchester to London to work on the shows and.
Right.
Whatever. And then, so I eventually, carried on working on Screamadelica. And then even at one point, I think I've got a co-production credit on one of the tracks, but I haven't got any co-writing. So I guess I'm quite a lot of money down in the scheme of things. But at the time, I was really doing well, and I was really chuffed with it. And I'm still really chuffed with it because I had a real blast. But even, I'm actually even doing the vocals on one of the tracks. So there's a track called, I can't remember the name of the track. Andy.
Do I have to?
Oh, Trip Inside This House.
Right.
So me and Rob, the other guitarist, we ended up doing all the vocals on Trip Inside This House because Bobby didn't turn up. So we were both doing Bobby Gillespie impersonations, I seem to remember. And it was our vocals that made it onto the record because Bobby never showed up for that track. So I did loads of, so once that album was done, I then toured with them for a year or so. I think, I did a couple of tours anyway. And I was doing keyboards, backing vocals, percussion, on tour with them.
So what I want to know is, they're paying you $500 a day. You're getting a wage from Creation. This is pre-Oasis, isn't it?
Yeah.
So this is before they've really
it's before they've really cracked it, and actually Screamadelica was one of the albums that really went cracked it, right?
So because this money is only coming to you via the success of the label, I guess, isn't it?
Yeah.
So who is bringing the success in that's going to allow you to charge $500?
They were a successful indie label in indie terms, right? They had a little office over in Bethnal Green in East London.
Yeah.
And, they had My Bloody Valentine, they had Primal Scream, they had The Lilac Time, Slow Dive, all of that stuff, right? So they're doing pretty well. It's a proper label. There's 10 people working there. It's kind of, it's doing all right, but it's before it got into the big time with bands like Oasis and before Primal Scream became Screamadelica Primal Scream, and before they'd done a bunch of other kind of big dance hits before Weatherall got, totally embedded and all of that stuff. So, they had enough money to pay me.
Yeah.
And they were really generous. And, I'm eternally grateful to Alan for giving me the break and for, signing a kind of someone that, that was completely unknown. I ended up working under a bunch of different names, making dance records, and I did that for about 12 years.
So right time, right place kind of thing, isn't it, with Alan McGee? It's that all these stories are like that, aren't they? You do a bunch of work in a bunch of different fields, and you don't know how they pair up or how they're going to pair up. And at some point in time, all of those skills converge with a stroke of luck of Alan McGee doing an E.
Yeah, I mean exactly. And the funny thing is now, with this biopic that's coming out called Creation Stories, which is out in March. The producer and director of that is a guy called Nathan McGough.
Right. And
Nathan was a very old friend of mine, and he was involved with Factory because he was actually a very close friend of Tony Wilson, one of the founder directors of Factories. And Nathan ended up kind of living at Tony's house. I ended up going to Tony's house quite a lot because he had an edit suite in his basement, which was the Factory Records video company called Icon. So I was always hanging around at Tony's house. And I got to know Nathan there, and it was a very small gene pool in Manchester in those days. And so Nathan and I kind of circled around the same girls and had the same girlfriends. And there was this very kind of tight, incestuous kind of thing going on in Manchester at the time. And then Nathan and I lose touch. Nathan then becomes Happy Monday's manager when I go off to do different other things. And then, years later, we loop back round. He comes down to Frome because he's managing another band, and they play in Frome. And then Nathan and I reconvene, and he's like, I'm making this biopic, and would you mind, can we use one of the Hypnotone tracks in the biopic? I was like, yeah, no, that sounds great. And so now we've got Bez from Happy Mondays pretending to DJ at the Hacienda in the biopic, playing one of my records. So,
are you not in the biopic? Have you asked him, where's my cameo?
Where's my cameo? No, I didn't do that. I don't think I'd have gotten that. I don't know. But it's just funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like all of those loops closing, and all of that stuff. I'm really looking forward to seeing the film. Haven't seen it yet. I think it's going to be good though.
I've been thinking about approaching Alan McGee for a podcast actually. And then I noticed that a bipic's coming out, and I thought, I probably won't even get anywhere near him now, because it'll be the major outlets for a while now, won't it? And maybe I'll wait till it's died down.
I don't know. I mean, maybe I should introduce you to Nathan.
Yeah.
Because maybe he can introduce you to Alan. But Nathan's got a story to tell, because he's been through the whole Factory process like I did. Factory was really important to him. It was as important to him as it was to me. He had this closer relationship to Tony Wilson than I had.
Yeah.
But then he's gone through the whole. He was Happy Monday's manager, for God's sake.
Oh, yeah.
So he's probably got as many ludicrous stories about being on the road with Happy Mondays as I have for being on the road with Primal Scream.
There's a whole podcast just in Happy Mondays stories, I imagine. So where are we up to now? What year are we up to? You've done Primal Scream. Was this 89?
Yeah. So went through all of that stuff into the early 90s, I think. And then as I made more music and made a bit of money, I ended up with a load of computers that were sitting, I had a studio, I had my own studio to work in. But the way we often worked in the control room, so the live area was completely empty, right? We didn't use it for anything. So I ended up, stacking a load of kind of computers into the live area that were just redundant, last year's model or whatever. Right. I started thinking to myself, what can I do with that? And so the internet was becoming a thing. I'd already done a research project into kind of digital audio, feasibility of using digital audio on the internet. I did that in the mid-'80s, which was a European funded thing, thanks to a very forward-thinking, Manchester City Council. And I had all these computers. I was like, the internet is going to be, it's important, right? So I started my first digital agency, and I got a couple of, postgrads or, recently graduated programming students out of Manchester University. And I created a digital agency, and we started building websites for different record companies So everything from React Music to Warner Brothers to Sony to wherever. And we had this agency making websites for labels and for bands and whatever. And by virtue of that, I ended up meeting quite often with the chairman of Sony Music. And the one day in particular, I met with this guy, and they'd been a client of ours for a year or two, and we were making good money from them. I had no complaints. But I really enjoyed going in to see, Sony, because when I was there, I'd spend all of my time going, you know what, guys, I'm disappointed. I thought Sony was a forward-thinking company, but you're not doing this, you haven't done that yet, you don't seem to understand this, digital, mobile, right, online, physical sales, what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. So I had a 3-hour meeting with the chairman at Sony, and I came out of that, and his assistant said, Jesus, what happened? How did, why? He never told, I've had to cancel like 10 meetings while you've been in there. And I said, I don't know, we were just chatting, Anyway, I went back to Manchester. I didn't think anything of it. I thought we may get a bit more business out of them. I got a call the next day from his assistant, and she said, listen, Paul would really like you to come back down. I think he wants to talk to you about something quite serious. I was like, right, I can't, I'm working. So she said, well, can I just get something in the diary for next week, maybe? And I was like, yeah, okay. Okay, fine. So,
and you didn't think at this point that she was maybe sort of hinting at you like, come on now, come on down?
I thought maybe they've got a bit more work for us or something like that.
Okay.
Anyway, in a subsequent call, she said, listen, I think Paul wants to make you an offer. I was like, okay, I don't know about that, because I've got my own company and everything's going okay, and I don't know if I want to do that. But she's, but I started thinking to myself, Sony Music, that's quite a big deal. And then I started thinking to myself, I've never had a job. I wonder how much I'd get paid, So I started thinking, maybe if they pay me that much, if it's X, then maybe I should do it, right? Maybe I should take that job and move into a big corporation, and it might be quite exciting. And so I had another meeting with Paul. This is Paul Berger, who was the chairman at the time, and he was all over it. And at the end of the meeting, he's like, "Listen, how would it be if I offered you this?" And he mentioned a number, and it was 3 times X. It was 3 times what I thought it might be. Right.
Right. Hey, can you divulge? Or are we not going there?
It was a pretty big 6-figure number, right?
Right.
And I was used to running my own agency, but I was only, in a good year, I would pay myself 50 or 60 grand, and that was in a good year. A lot of the time, it was way less than that. And because I was running this company, and I ended up with quite a few people, so I didn't really have the knowledge of what I was worth. And so I, in short order, basically what I did is I recruited a managing director for my agency, and I told them what company car I wanted at Sony, and I got one. And they paid me 3 times X. I went in as a director straight away.
Yeah.
It was pretty mad. All of a sudden I was in these meetings where I was with the senior management team of Sony. I was like, Jesus, how did this happen? And, looking up at the slides from a perspective of a recording artist, right?
Yeah.
And I was looking at how many hundreds of millions were coming through the company, how much of that made it to the artists, how much of it was going into Sony, and so on and so forth. And it was a really
eye-opening,
enlightening. It was very, very enlightening and very exciting.
Yeah.
And then, so I went in as a company director with the UK, and then about a year later, I became European vice president, and then I started driving all of the new technology strategy for Sony across 26 countries.
Right.
And then I got dragged over to the US quite a lot, and I ended up doing a number of years over in the US, where I was in New York for a week a month for a number of years.
Right.
And I was helping them figure out what the hell to do with mobile. And I guess I was with Sony for 7 or 8 years altogether. So it took us into the around 2004, something like that. And it was weird because then my boss got fired. My boss was the European chairman.
Right.
And we were doing pretty well in Europe, especially with digital. Must have been something to do with me because that was my job, right? But they didn't like that in New York because it felt to them like the balance of powers was shifting from New York office to the London office.
Right.
Because we were doing more revolutionary things there with digital technologies in general. So it kind of, what they did was they basically cut the head off the snake, and they fired my boss, the European chairman. And then they sort of said, "Oh, you're going to report into this guy now over in New York." And I was like, "Oh."
That sounds so weird to me, because it's like, oh, look, we're doing really well, or, the company's doing really well in like one sort of, one pillar of the company is doing really, really well. We don't like this. That's very strange to me that they wouldn't just adopt the same strategies that you were doing and then have that success.
Yeah, Sony Music is a privately owned business, right? It's not publicly traded. It's part of the Sony Group, which is publicly traded, but it personally isn't.
Right.
It individually isn't traded. That means that it's essentially run for senior executives, right? So I was on a good 6-figure salary, but there's a lot of people in New York who are on 7- and 8-figure salaries.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
See,
and
yeah.
they don't want their position.
They need to justify their jobs.
Undermined.
Right.
No, they don't need to justify their jobs. They're so high up that they justify it to themselves.
I see. Right.
But they don't want the power moving to Europe, because that potentially has a negative impact on the power of the New York office and the tenability of those roles. So they decided to get rid of the European chairman, and I lost my wingman, my protection.
I see.
I was asked to report into someone who was a few levels down from chairman, and I wasn't used to doing that. And so I sort of said, no, thank you.
Right.
And they cut me a deal and gave me a bunch of money, and I left.
Which is good timing. Now, I wanted to ask you initially, when he offers you this job, I know we've got to backpedal a little bit here. What was the qualities that he said that he saw in you that he wanted? What was it he said to you in his pitch to you of like, I want to give you this job with the 6 figures, the 3 times, X, your dream amount. What was it he said to you? He said, Tony, you're thinking of what, the future, or you're ahead of the game here. What is it?
Well, it basically was a lot of the time I was doing all the talking, so I was very much like, you need to do this. It's so stupid you're not doing that. Why haven't you done this yet? Da-da-da-da.
Right.
And all he said to me, in a nutshell, Andy, all he said to me was, we need you.
Right. So,
and we need you to do that stuff.
And the money did the rest of the talking for him.
The money did the rest of the talking. Okay. And, I was so lucky because, I ended up, I'd never had a brand new car before. Right? I ended up with this ridiculous car, and then they were like, "Oh, and you've got an assistant." And then they were like, "Oh, and by the way, we're going to give you an apartment inside Sony on the top floor of the building on Great Marlborough Street." And and then they were like, "Oh, by the way, you've got a corner office in New York, and you've got another assistant over there, and and by the way, do you need a driver?" And it was kind of
right. What happens to your ego at this point? Because that's a lot. And how old are you then?
Oh, I'm pretty old, I guess. I'm 38, 39, I think.
Okay, so you all right, because a lot of the time when people get that kind of money and power and influence early, it goes south, doesn't it? So you've got enough life experience behind you at this point to roll with it and not let it sort of be the end of you. Because it could have become another Torquay, couldn't it?
Yeah, it could have in a way. But you know what? I had... Listen, I'd experienced every kind of rock and roll excess that could be experienced, because I toured both as a lighting director but also as a recording artist, right, with some pretty extreme characters. Yeah. And so we had, those are other stories that maybe weren't their own thing, but, being away with Nick Cave, being away with Primal Scream, being away with with the weird Germans and all of that stuff. There is no level of excess that has not been plumbed at that point. Yeah, right. There is nothing that has remained undone.
So you're a survivor.
Yeah. So by the time I get to Sony Music, all I'm thinking is, don't blow it.
Right. Okay.
just do this, own it, do it. And there are still loads of people, it's a big record company, right? So obviously there's loads of people doing coke all over the place and having inappropriate relations with their assistants on conference room tables. But that really at that point wasn't interesting to me.
Right.
I just wanted to focus in on turning the Supertanker, which was a major record company, and persuading them to do things that they really just didn't want to do on a department by department basis. Digital technology touched sales, it touched artist relations, it touched A&R, online presence, audience engagement, all of that stuff they hadn't yet done. Even the press department, everything was done in a very, very analog way.
So is this pre-iTunes?
Yeah, it is pre-iTunes. Well, it transitioned into iTunes while I was there, and I had to cut some of those deals. But it was when the trouble started brewing with online offerings like free music from Napster and stuff like that.
LimeWire. Yes.
So, all of that.
I have to put my hands up, Tony, and say that I was a LimeWire kid.
Yeah, and Pirate Bay and all of that stuff, right? So, it was all there. I get it. And who's going to, when it's an all-you-can-eat buffet and there's a very, very low kind of entry price, who's going to not do that, right? Mm-hmm. There are strategies that could have been deployed early on, like licensing our music to, some of those entities earlier and kind of cutting off the creating a compelling service earlier that would have undermined the legitimacy the availability of music on those free services.
Would that have been streaming like we see today, or would it have been bringing in Napster and LimeWire so they don't feel like these outsider entities, like bringing them into the mix and saying, hey, what's going on here?
There was a moment where, there was talk about buying Napster, but there was a really weird vibe in Sony Music with its digital strategy, and they were obsessed with walled gardens, and they were obsessed with kind of creating an area on the internet where it was just Sony artists, and they expected people to come and just look at Sony artists. And I spent a lot of my time saying no. For example, I created a rock brand while I was there. I hate rock music, but anyway, I created a rock brand. And
hurt my heart. You hurt my heart then.
I know, I don't hate rock music. I like all music now, to be honest. But at the time, because I was a dance music person. Yeah. So, but I created this rock brand called hardplace.net. And that obviously now would probably, with a mature internet, that's probably a completely different URL. And but Hardplace was like was a rock kind of portal.
Yeah.
And I really freaked Sony out because what I wanted to do was bring in artists from other labels, because there's no way that any hard rock fan is going to go to a hard rock portal that is just Sony artists. They don't care about what label they're on. No. So what I did was I, for the first time, created a portal where other labels could represent their content, and I guess it was like an early iteration of a kind of an online presence that we would expect to see nowadays. Yeah. And it started to work, and then I created a radio show off the back of that, and merchandising and all of that stuff. So yeah, that was the kind of thing I was up against the whole time. It's very, very blinkered view of what was possible with digital.
So I've got probably about 2,000 CDs next door. I'm still buy CDs all the time, which I think I'm mugging myself off really, but I love it, and it's something I love. Anyway, some of those CDs have a sticker on that says "Hard Place Classics." Yeah. Was this your
That's
initiative?
me. Yeah,
that's you.
Yeah.
I got a Reef CD, I think, with that on.
Yeah, Reef. Yeah, they were one of the bands. Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny, isn't it? Funny how things.
Yeah. Well, at least I'm not lying.
No, I know. It's just odd what sticks in your head, isn't it? It's like,
that is
sometimes
weird.
You see those stickers, and I don't know why, because I know that it's got that fuzzy sort of font on it. Do you know what I mean? It kind of tries to look a bit edgy, but not too edgy.
Yeah, a little bit kind of world worn. Yeah, exactly.
That's fascinating. So you get out of it in 2004. 4 years later is the big crash of the music industry anyway. So you kind of you've jumped the ship at the right time, probably, haven't you?
I suppose so, yeah.
Do you think now does your position exist within Sony now?
Yeah, there's a couple of people that are doing that job. I mean, there's probably only 7 people in the world that are doing that job at big media organizations.
And is their pay going to be the same?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so those.
Well, actually, I got told that if a couple of people when I said, I'm not going to report to that guy. A couple of people said to me, just wait, just give it 2 years. He'll go. You'll be, global head, and you'll be on 7 figures at that point. And I was like, I was kind of a bit burnt out, and I just said, no, let's just cut the deal. I want to go.
Right.
So I do, obviously, having run a few startups since then, where I haven't got like a couple of assistants and a driver and an apartment in Soho, I have sometimes questioned the validity of that decision.
Right.
But there you go.
So they've cut you, when you left, they cut you, what is it, like a severance deal?
Yeah.
And what is a severance? I'm not going to ask you how much it is because it's quite obvious that you're not going to tell me, but what does a severance deal at that level look like? Is it a percentage of what you would have earned? What's the deal there? How do you figure that out? It was
a couple years money and a bunch of other stuff.
Bunch of other stuff? What, like royalties on future tech stuff or
no, nothing like that. It's just kind of
keep the car.
a bunch of things like things like keep the car, that kind of thing. So it was a good deal, and I was living in Brighton at the time because I had this place in Soho that they gave me, but my main house was down in Brighton.
Yeah,
and so I decided, you know what, I've come close to burnout here. I'm going to take time out. So I took a year off. I learned to fly aeroplanes, and I learned to sail properly, and I did a whole bunch of Ponzi stuff like that. It's
not Ponzi. That's pretty hardcore.
Dated a load of girls and had a load of fun, and then thought, shit, I wonder if I can earn that kind of money again. And I really didn't know whether anyway, I think I let my career go cold for too long, actually. But I ended up running a couple of other tech companies, American tech companies, in the media sector, and running their European businesses. So that kind of keeps us going for another like 4 or 5 years, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then my wife and I decided we just thought, screw this, I'm on this kind of conveyor belt of, tech and media and all of that stuff. And I was really over it. And I've moved further and further away from being a creative person, right? Because originally I was a recording artist, and now all of a sudden I'm running these tech companies. And so we just thought, screw this, let's move to the south of France. So that's what we did.
Do you think money kills creativity? Do you think a part of it is that, you see these bands and these artists that their first sort of 2 albums are very relevant, and they have something about them, and then as soon as they get money and again like assistants and cars and things like that, and you hear that 3rd album or 4th album, and you think, oh God, you're just not angry enough. You got nothing left to say. Do you know what I mean?
I don't know.
Now you're happy. You're not making good music.
Well, here's the thing. I think that can be true in an early career, but I think in a later career, it's the absolute inverse that's true. So now,
right.
One of the reasons that I'm running this company with my other founders at Celestial is, I want to make a buck again. And the reason I want to make a buck is not because I want a shiny car, but it's because I want to buy creative freedom. I want to be able to go and write a movie. I want to be able to do a bit more music without any kind of commercial pressure. So in later life, I think cash is liberating because it buys you creative freedom.
Right.
In an early career, I think that cash can be completely debilitating because you start to think you're the center of the universe and you act like a dick. So, it just depends where you are, what age you're at, I think, and what it is you're trying to achieve.
Who have you seen in your time that's had the most potential and has got all these things, and then a year later you're sat there and you're going, it's just a dickhead now?
I think one springs to mind, and it's a Sony artist called Finley Quay.
Right.
And Finley Quaye was a really great guy, and he released a couple of really great albums. And then he just got really up himself and sort of blew deal after deal with label after label because he was just too, like, smoking too much weed and spending too much money and just like, you know, maybe it's a bad example, but he's the one that just springs front of mind.
Yeah.
I think, you know, I'm not a big fan of Jamiroquai, but he's made some pretty decent pop records, but again, if you're in the room, it's not great. You know, it had the potential of not being great. And then Sade as well, you know, she lost her way, and I won't talk too much about that, but she had some big problems, and that came from money, not from, maybe it comes from her, I don't know, but maybe, you know, it came from money as well.
It's interesting. And to just to balance that out, who do you see who have come from maybe nothing and they get somewhere and you think, God, this person is just becoming, they just keep growing, they keep getting better, they keep developing, they keep evolving. Or is it mostly the other way?
I don't think it is mostly the other way. I think Radiohead are a really good example of a band that's been around a really long time and completely continue to innovate. And you can go 3 albums back with those guys and it's still like a brilliant record, and they've got, their ethics are in the right place, and they haven't become dickish, and they're just really brilliant. And I think that, I was watching that Billie Eilish documentary that Apple's just released the other day about that, you know, about her first album and how she, you know, first album, groundbreaking sound with her brother and her recording in a bedroom and then mastering in someone else's lounge. And it's a record. I've never heard the audio textures that she and he have created before. And you know, first album made in a bedroom, wins 7 Grammys or whatever it was. So, you know, it can go either way, can't it?
Yeah.
You know. And
it's madness. And you can say, oh, you know, because her dad's fairly successful, isn't he, in sort of connected in the music industry.
The whole family, they're this classic kind of, you know, hey, let's do a family band. You know, and I'll teach you how to play the ukulele, and it's really like that. And it's quite a touching documentary. But she, you know, they were meant to get that record, that first album out before they toured. She had such a brilliant viral presence, going back to that super distribution thing, that they were still getting sellout shows before the album was released, you know, just because of the virality of some of the early tracks they released. And, you know, and so she made that transition from kind of, you know, hanging around in the backyard with her folks to kind of having a driver and a team of 10 surrounding her everywhere she went, you know, halfway through the tour. That was already happening. So it's madness. But yeah, I was going to say, regardless of things like that album, regardless of where you've come from or whatever, if you're creating an album and someone like you is sat there saying, I've never heard an album quite like this. I've never heard an album visit places, you know, sonically that this place has gone. I don't really care how much money you've got. There's something in that which is just vision, isn't it? Yeah.
Or a happy accident, but it's probably...
Yeah, it's pretty mad. I mean, that album, that first album, texturally is just amazing. And it's got all these weird little drops in it and all of these little nuances and bits of detail and, you know, it's just like, it's even just the single words that are dropped in by the mail, you know, like by our brother at various points in the track and stuff are just, you know, just the word listen that he says in certain places. And it's just... it's great, you know, and it's got all of this cultural context and it's incredibly relevant, and it's to do with, you know, that zeitgeist, that kind of miserableness of being isolated and yet incredibly well connected, better connected than we ever have been before. And she really nails all of that stuff. Teenage isolation, she nails really beautifully.
I remember doing pre-COVID, I was working Glastonbury. I was a crew chief, on a production crew, and I had 2 guys with me. I had more than that, but I had 2 guys in particular that they didn't care what shifts they were given, or how hard they had to work for that festival, all they were there for was Billie Eilish. That's all they could bang on about was, Andy, can you make sure that we can get away for 2 hours for Billie Eilish at the stage on Sunday, whenever it was. And that was all I heard all weekend was Billie Eilish. And I was just, there was something, I knew she was a special artist from that thing. It was just like they didn't care. They were just there for 45 minutes of this, what I thought was like a sort of an alternative pop star thing, which I guess she sort of is. I got to be honest, I haven't really listened to her. I did see a bit of her live, but I'm sure the record is a completely different experience.
It's really it's a headphones on experience, that record. You should definitely go for the whole album with the headphones on, and it's really worth it,
Okay, make a note of that. So you've come out, like you said, you want to make a buck, you want to buy this financially, you want to buy this creative sort of freedom, or this sort of headspace to get creative again. And does this lead us to Celestial?
It kind of does, yeah. I was, there's a little bit missing. I was in France for 7 years. I ran a non-related business in France for 4 of those years, a non-tech related business, which was a disaster and ended up in divorce and us moving back to the UK.
What business was this?
It was really weird. We thought, we'll do a kind of semi-retirement thing. Let's go and rent some camper vans. It'll be fun. And so
that sounds like a terrible idea for.
Well, I don't know. There's this romantic notion of classic VW camper vans, right?
Right.
And I'm a skater, and I've got that kind of surf thing going on in my brain, and I like the idea of camper vans. We bought a few, and we thought, we'll just rent them out every weekend. That'll be fun. It'll be extra income. We can kind of lay back by the pool most of the time. It'll be good fun. But I have this thing where I was like, you know what? This is really popular, and we got loads of coverage in The Guardian and da-da-da-da. So I went and raised £1 million, and then I rolled it out into 4 different countries. And it was an absolute nightmare. It's really horrible. I really hated it. And it was really stressy for me and my missus, bless her. And we never had a holiday. We were there to lie by the pool.
Yeah.
And so for maybe 3 or 4 of the 7 years we were there, we were running around all over France and Spain and elsewhere, trying to help out clients whose van had inevitably broken down because it was a 50-year-old camper van, right?
Yeah.
So there was one moment where I was just driving from one side of France to the other. I think it was 3 o'clock in the morning in my own recovery truck with the yellow lights flashing on the top and a replacement camper van on the back, trying to find these clients in the middle of the night at a campsite. I just thought, what the fuck am I doing? Why am I doing this?
You think, I used to have a driver. Now I'm driving a fucking recovery truck.
What am I doing? And so that was the point at which I was like, you know what? No. So
how did you? What was that? How did that conversation go? You get home at sort of 6 a.m. Did you, and go?
Yeah,
darling, we need to talk.
Completely demolished from days of stress and angst and driving. And I structured that company in the wrong way. It was underfunded. I ended up having to do a lot of the stuff myself. My wife also, she ended up doing a lot of heavy lifting, and we just said, this is horrible, isn't it? It's not fun. Should we just not do it now?
Yeah.
So we didn't do it. We divorced. We moved, and we came to Froome. And one of the great things about running that camper van company, probably the only great thing, was that we started to make our own marketing collateral, right? So we started making our own little online ads and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I bought a drone to do that with. Not just so you could get fancy aerial shots of the vans, but also because you could do crane shots and dolly shots and all of these things that are pretty expensive to set up if you're making a real advert.
Yeah.
I recognized you could do all of those shots with a drone. And that really got me thinking. So I got real pleasure from making the marketing materials for that company. And then the penny dropped and I was like, you know what? I can be creative again. It's got technology, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to start a drone company. So started a drone company and then moved to the UK. That company actually was called Hacienda, and we started making, marketing films for different, real estate and, going to nice places and staying there and filming the stuff. And that was all good fun. And, I loved Froome immediately. I met a whole bunch of creative people here, lots of refugees from the media sector. However much you hate it, having Babington House down the road.
I don't hate it. I get why people. Andy, there's an old Froome and a new Froome and all of that. Absolutely.
There's a bit of antagonism there. But for me, it meant that, that was one of the elements that attracted a load of people to Froome. And the first time I came here, I was introduced, within the first hour or two, I was introduced to a good, 6-8 people who were interesting and were doing interesting things. Anyway, long story short, I had a drone company. I was in this office that I'm sitting in now. This is forward space at the old church school up in Froome. And my office mate at the time, Mark, he was having a Christmas party a year ago, and he said, "Oh yeah, come to the Christmas party." And I'd in the meantime, I'd been hearing about this guy, Hoppy, who had a drone company. I was like, what are the odds, with two guys with drone companies in Froome?
Yeah.
And I went to this Christmas party and I got introduced for the first time to Hoppy. And I sort of jokingly pushed him against the wall. I said, "You're Hoppy. Everyone thinks I'm you. I'm sick of you stealing my, bloody backstory with your drone company." Anyway, we had a laugh about that. And, he started to tell me what he was doing with Celestial, and it sounded really compelling. And because of my background, a bit of consultancy, and I kind of knew the investment sort of landscape a little bit, I said to him, well, why don't I help you out? You don't have to pay me any money, but why don't you give me a little chunk of the company, whatever, 5%, and I'll go away and we'll get some investment for you.
Yeah.
And let's get the ball rolling. Because at that point, it was just he and the other co-founder, Nick. And they had the idea, but they hadn't really turned it into a business yet. So I said, I can help you with that. And after about, it was a few weeks, I think, I had to sit down with them. And they said, "Listen, you've kind of got quite a lot done in a very short amount of time. And we think it's appropriate if you come in as a full co-founder. So we'd like to give you 30% of the business." And I was I really like those guys. They're brilliant. They're really lovely people. The idea was really solid. I could see immediately the investors really liked the idea. And so it seemed like the thing to do. So I came on board. We did a round of investment. We opened and closed that round within 2 weeks. And we were 20% oversubscribed, and all of my other experience about raising investment was completely different to that. It always takes months. You always have to twist their fucking arms until it's like, "Have you written the check yet? Have you transferred the money? You want to do this?"
Yeah.
It takes months and months and months, right, to get this stuff done. Usually, when bearing in mind, not only did we not have any clients or anything really, we also didn't even own a drone. Right at that point, but we managed to sell. We told a good story. The investors immediately loved the story, and not only did investors love the story, but future clients loved it. As soon as we started talking to them about it, we kind of got the deal, and also staff members loved it, and so everything has coalesced around this core idea.
Right.
Investors, a great team, and great clients. And so we still had no drones when we first started speaking to our kind of launch client. We had some drones, actually, it's not true. We started doing tests and we started to figure out some stuff with very small numbers of drones, 20 drones or something.
Right.
And then we got this opportunity to pitch to Augment up in Edinburgh for the New Year's Eve event. Which had to be different because of COVID, so it wasn't hundreds of thousands of people on the street as it usually might be. But they needed something different. So we pitched them this idea that we'll put drones up and we'll film it, and then the film of those drones can be the event, and people will be able to still celebrate, but in a safe way. So we identified all of these different locations around Edinburgh, all of the landmark locations, like Carlton Hill and Murrayfield Stadium and the Fourth Rail Bridge and all of that stuff. Right. And we talked and we talked and we talked. We had 17 meetings with Edinburgh City Council, Scots Police, Ministry of Defence, CAA, etc., etc. All of this multi-agency kind of meetings where everyone talked for hours and hours and hours, and we gradually kind of manoeuvred them into this position. It's like, okay, you could do this. I guess you could do this, And bear in mind, no one had ever done a proper swarm drone show in the UK at that point in time either. The CAA didn't even. We were the first company to submit what's called an operational safety case to the CAA, Civil Aviation Authority.
Yeah, I want you to get into all the nitty gritty of this stuff, the how you apply, what you have to ask for, the software. Yeah, just go for it with all of this stuff. Yeah.
It was pretty crazy. And so after 17 of those multi-hour, multi-agency meetings, they said no. And we were like, oh, that's a no then. And we were like, yeah, that's a no. It's too dodgy. I was like, come on, man. We're going to do this. It's going to be 300 drones, but it will be 3:00 in the morning. The show only lasts 5 minutes. No one's going to know that it's there. If anyone hears it or spots it, by the time they've got their trousers on, it's going to be over. There's a zero COVID threat here, right?
Yeah.
And they were like, no, we can't be responsible for a single COVID death, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. So we thought they were being really overcautious. Fair enough, it's their decision at the end of the day. But then we had this brainwave, and we were like, okay, we'll do it in the Highlands. There was nobody there, right? No one can come.
Right.
And they were like, oh, yeah, okay. So the money got signed off by Edinburgh City Council. And we decided to put the show on in the Highlands, and we ended up at that point, with just 150 drones up to a loch in a beautiful location called Achnacarry. And we had underestimated the challenge associated with a boggy loch side with no infrastructure at all, and not even a mobile phone signal. And how the hell do you technically launch, all of those drones from that location?
Right.
But with our production partners, we managed to figure that out. We had to get, line of sight, kind of microwave Wi-Fi pumped down the length of the loch. To give you an idea of how remote it was, you get the loch itself was 14 miles long. And to get to the bit of the loch where we were going to be,
yeah.
We had to drive down a single track road with 7-ton trucks, and it took an hour and a half to get to the point on the loch where we need to be, because you had to drive so cautiously and carefully. Anyway, we built all of this infrastructure. We put up each of the 150 drones had its own takeoff and landing point that was built above the bog next to the loch.
Hey guys, Andy here. I just wanted to take you out of this conversation. Firstly, to say I hope you're enjoying this podcast so far. But secondly, when we were recording this, the memory card in my audio equipment filled up. It reached maximum capacity, and that meant that I couldn't record anymore. And so I know what you're thinking. Amateur hour, Andy. Amateur mistakes. I know. I'll try not to do it again. It probably will happen again at some point though. And at this point, we've patched in the audio from the Zoom feed. So there's nothing wrong with your headphones. They're not broken. There's nothing wrong with your 4G or your Wi-Fi or whatever you're listening to this on. The audio is about to switch up because we're using a different audio source for the rest of my end of the conversation. So I hope you're enjoying this. I'm going to put you back into the conversation now. The audio is going to be slightly different, but bear with it because it's definitely worth it. We'll see you on the other side. Thanks very much. So what is this, like some sort of like decking or like what stage flooring?
It was truss. It was like a truss system, that you use. You would see putting lights on a stage rig. So it's a truss system each, and then at different points along these long lengths of truss were these plywood platforms that were ratchet strapped to the truss, and but then there had to be a control marquee where we could run our control infrastructure. Then we needed a battery provisioning and drone handling marquee. So all of that had to be built on platforms over the bog. And then we needed a welfare marquee so that all of the staff, we had 40 staff on site for the show, for the whole week we were there. And then we needed toilets and, transport. We needed accommodation, we needed all of that stuff.
Wow.
So it was really, really harsh and really took us all to our limits. But we filmed everything for real at the Highlands. And then we filmed all of the locations that we were originally going to go to in Edinburgh. And then we comped footage of the drones in the Highlands into those locations. And so the end piece, we ended up with 3 5-minute films for Hogmanay, which was the 29th, 30th and 31st of December. 3 5-minute films. We ended up pulling this whole thing together with the Scottish Poet Laureate, a woman called Jackie Kay. She wrote a poem specially for it. We ended up with a bunch of superstars kind of doing the narration, including David Tennant and others. And we ended up with some music that was commissioned from a cult kind of indie electro band from the Isle of Skye called Nightworks.
Right.
So they wrote a piece of music specially for it. And we kind of created this piece that was this kind of artistic collaboration and endeavor. And I said right at the beginning of our chat today about logo wear and, how unimaginative it is to put up just a logo in the sky, even though it may be transitionally impressive.
Yeah.
It's not really going to take you very far. Anyway, we created the opposite of that. We created this beautiful story. The first chapter was about the past and how shit this year has been. Second chapter was like the present, regrouping, kind of consolidating where you are, becoming strong again.
Yeah.
And the third chapter was like, where do we go next and how optimistic can we be? And we told that story using all of these beautiful technologies. And guess what? Like the first project we'd ever done, and we got more than 8 million views across the internet. We got coverage by 650 news outlets around the world.
Amazing.
50 countries with exposure to 2 billion people.
Super distro.
Yes, exactly right. That's it. That's totally what it was, and that was our launch gig, and it made us realize what we are. So Celestial, basically, we're a creative agency that uses drones as opposed to a drone display company. We're a creative agency. Yeah, and we're doing a couple of things now. We're just about to. We're going to be doing a big project for Greenpeace, we're just in scripting that at the moment. We're talking to the Royal Mail about them changing the perception of the Royal Mail into a future-facing company that uses drones for delivery, and so we're using drones to tell that story. We're doing some stuff for Amnesty International and a bunch of other things.
Is that with Royal Mail? Is that them preempting Amazon's move into drone delivery?
No, it's funny. We got introduced to Royal Mail by a company called Drone Prep, and Drone Prep went to Royal Mail as consultants, and they introduced some technology to Royal Mail for what's called beyond visual line of sight, or BVLOS, delivery of using drones for delivery, where you can't see where the destination is.
Right.
And so they now have a couple of routes that Royal Mail are routinely using to deliver stuff. Some of it is kind of live tissue and blood samples and all of that stuff. And they've got this one route in particular to the Isle of Mull up in Scotland.
Right.
And so actually, weirdly enough, Royal Mail are ahead of Amazon in this country in terms of using drones for real deliveries on a regular basis. Right. They are ahead of Amazon. They're the only company really doing it properly here commercially. So they want to do a lot more of that. But I think they also want to rehabilitate the word drone, and we're kind of with one of our new staff members. We want to propagate this whole hashtag of drones for good.
Right.
And we want to tell that story about, not only can it be a wonderful, entertainment medium, but it can also, do good things for remote communities in different places,
And is this because I understand that one of your team members is an ex-Ministry of Defence employee? We can cut this out if this is stuff you've told me in confidence.
I wouldn't say he's ex-MOD. What I would say is that there are three founders. So myself, with the background that we've talked about today, it's always been technology and creativity together. Then we've got John Hopkins, who is a fantastic filmmaker, and he's spent the last 20 years making TV adverts and a feature film. Really knows how to tell a story. Really knows immediately, within a few minutes of sitting with a client, how to engage that client with a fantastic idea that completely encapsulates the client's thoughts and ambitions. And then we've got Nick, who's the other original founder with John. And Nick has a background in events production. So building those stages at Glastonbury and wherever, right? All of that stuff. But obviously also Nick knows how to build drones from the ground up, because he worked for a company that was commissioned by the MOD, right, to make a futuristic ride-on hover bike, right?
Okay.
So he was hands-on, like literally building that thing, and got to understand all of the associated drone technologies that were necessary for the flight control systems and for propulsion and all of that stuff. And so because of that, he's got an awful lot of experience. It's great, because he's got the events side.
Yeah.
As well as, and for me, it's great because, I've got a bit of filmmaking and I've got the events side because I've toured as a lighting guy.
Yeah.
But I've also got the strategy side. And with John, it's the same thing. He's got a bunch of filmmaking stuff and creativity. We've got this beautiful Venn diagram of kind of intersection between the three of us, where we've all got like specialities, but we all understand one another's kind of operational limitations and challenges, because we've all kind of had a foot in those camps as well.
Right. That's amazing. So when you said that the why I brought up that MOD kind of thing is because you said hashtag drones for good. And then this is because there's talk, isn't there, that drones are militarized and being sort of eyed up as weapons of war. Is that part of this movement, drones for good? Is, let's move away from the fact that, they could be very bothersome. And also you've got the whole drone strikes in the Middle East, haven't you? Which they're not the kinds of drones that we're talking about, though, are they? They're very different.
Yeah, they're very different. But obviously to the general public, then it's just the word drone, isn't it?
Yeah.
So they think drone equals bad. We're trying to address that. So for a start, Celestial, right at the beginning, we decided that we wanted kind of ethical underpinnings that would, make us all feel good about doing stuff. And that's why, the Hogmanay thing was great, because it was a story of hope and optimism. Greenpeace is great because it's about all of the things that you would expect of Greenpeace. So we wanted to make sure that we did good things, and we one of the things we do is we supersede fireworks, we think, and that's good because it's less carbon going out, it's reusable kind of medium and so on. But also we've set up a separate division within the company called Human Support. And what we aim to do with Human Support is create mechanisms whereby we can deploy drones to help people with digital signage. So that may be, in the case of a bushfire in California, us putting up the words "evacuate now" and an arrow pointing to where the hell people should go when the fire is too close. With refugees, for example, on the Mexican border with the US, we had a conversation with one of the guys in Tucson, where one of the big crossings is, for illegal immigration, and there are guys dying in the desert. There are people, I should say, families dying in that desert as they try and make their way to a better life for lack of water. They can't find water and they perish. Mm-hmm. So why not put up 100 drones that says water here, and pulls refugees towards where those water, because they do have big butts of water in the desert for refugees, except the refugees don't know where the hell they are. Right. And of course, your average Trump supporter wants to go and put a shotgun through those tanks of water anyway, right?
Right.
So why not have a humanitarian system that says, water here and save some lives that way? Why not, when it's a conflict zone in Darfur or wherever else, have some more drones that go up and say, landmines, danger, or border crossing here, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Why not, when humanitarian aid is about to be dropped in a hostile environment, have some drones up that say aid drop, and then a counter that says in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is, and points people to where the aid is going to land.
Yeah.
Right? All of these things you can do with drones, and people are not doing those things with drones, and we think we can. And the more frivolous side of that digital signage piece is that, it doesn't have to be about doom and gloom. Let's say you're at Glastonbury and you know what it's like. You constantly miss the act that you want to see on the main stage or on one of the smaller stages or whatever. Yeah. How about, a piece of signage, the drones go up, you look into the night sky and it says Billie Eilish Pyramid Stage, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And you don't have to kind of keep looking at your phone. The Wi-Fi's dropped out anyway. The piece of paper that you scribble all this stuff is in a muddy puddle somewhere. Why not just look up and go, oh, right, yeah, Billie Eilish is on in 10 minutes.
And you can't look in your little Guardian guide that's on your lanyard around your neck because it's too dark, or you've sweated into it for the past 12 hours.
Yeah. So that digital signage piece is, if we're going to do logo wear, that's going to be the closest we get to it. We want humanitarian messaging.
Yeah.
And we want kind of, to keep people informed when they're in those big events.
The potential is infinite, isn't it, really? It's very,
it's good.
Very, very cool. So tell me on the technical side, because can we talk about it? Maybe we'll edit it out if we can. But we talked a little bit a few months back, probably half a year ago, maybe even more than that now, about using the drones here in Frome to do some sort of alternative to the fireworks thing. And we got talking about what sort of things that you would need to do. And I just found the whole process, when you have to let people know about the airspace that you're going to be in, what's the word I'm searching for?
We're talking about the flight volume, where the aircraft are going to be the airspace that is occupied by the swarm.
I thought that was fascinating. I thought that the fact that you're looking for those areas of elevation, or where you would have a good place to launch them. I find the software that you must be using is that a closely guarded secret? Is that stuff owned by you, or what's going on there on the technical aspect of things?
So there's a few things. So firstly, talking about where the event takes place, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you need to do to kind of ensure safety of the crowd and safety of property. So there are a couple of different perimeters. In the middle of all of that stuff, you've got what's called the flight volume. And that's the area of 3D space where the drones are going to be operating. Underneath the flight volume, you need a sterile zone. And that means that people who are not directly, involved in the operational execution should not be. No public, no dog walkers walking through, whatever. You can't. It's completely sterile. Outside the flight volume is the contingency volume. And that's the area you have a geofence wrapped around. And if the drones breach that geofence, it kind of triggers a certain behavior.
Right.
So typically, if a drone touches that geofence, it will tell the drone that it needs to return to home immediately. And then outside the contingency volume, you've got what's called the buffer zone. And again, there's another geofence at the edge of the buffer zone. And that has a different behavioral trigger for the drones. And that would, for example, trigger what we call euphemistically an uncontrolled descent.
Right.
And what that means is it turns the engines off and it falls out of the sky. So you've got these different areas with different kind of virtual fences around them to ensure, things go the right way. And by the way, it never happens. And we've tried over and over again to make a drone breach any of those fences, and we just can't do it.
Right.
So, it's an incredibly safe system that we've got. But coming back to your original point, what do we use? Is it top secret software? What is it? We use a collection of different pieces of software, actually. The main flight control software comes from a vendor over in Eastern Europe, in Latvia. But we also, in order to get our animations into that software, we use, another 4 or 5 different bits of software. And we have to kind of move stuff through those bits of software in order to get them into the control software at the end. It's a very unwieldy, unpleasant, technically challenging process. And because of that, we are going to be developing, I think from next month we start our development cycle, and we're going to be building our own drone control software that will do the whole thing from beginning to end, and will be far more user-friendly, and that will end up being one of the revenue streams of the company. So what's going to happen with the drone market overall is this. It's a premium market right now. We can charge a lot of money for a show because very few people can do that show. As time passes, let's say 2 years down the road, it's going to be somewhat commoditized, as all technologies are. And that means that more people are going to be able to chuck a few drones up in the air for a 21st birthday party, and they'll charge, accordingly, not very much money. So what we're going to do is as that commoditization takes place, we're going to exploit that and give people the drone control software that will allow them to build easy to deploy shows in a far more economical way than is currently the case. We will, I hasten to add, continue to innovate as Celestial. So a couple of years down the road, we will still be doing the marquee events. We will still be doing the Glastonburys. We'll still be doing world tours with different artists and stuff like that. But at the other end of the spectrum will be this, my daughter's 21st birthday party. Let's get 50 drones up in a heart shape with her name in it or whatever. And that will be a couple of blokes in a transit van using our software to launch those drones. That's where it'll be.
Amazing. So your income is going to shift primarily from being the exclusive provider of these shows with the drones to licensing out your software.
I think so, yeah. I mean, like I say, there'll probably be half a dozen marquee events that we might do a year in a couple of years' time, 2 or 3 years' time. That's where it'll be. But those marquee events we'll charge 2 or 3 million quid for, right? So that's one part of the business. Yeah. Instead of doing, 20 shows, we'll do 6. Yeah. But they'll be very high value shows. It might be the Olympics, or it might be the World Cup, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And then, the other end of the spectrum, we will sell 10,000 copies of our software around the world to blokes with transit vans who want to put up Happy Birthday Lucy,
Amazing. Yeah, you've just been one step ahead at all times. I'm sure Big thank you to this week's guest, Tony Martin. We are going to leave all relevant links to things that Tony has talked about in the show notes descriptions. There you will find things on Celestial. You will find things on the Hacienda, probably. If we can get some of his music in there, we will. And anything related to this pod that we think is of interest will go in the show notes descriptions. Please like, subscribe, and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That really, really helps. If you've got a friend that you think will enjoy this podcast, then please send it to them. If you want to follow the podcast on social media, you can. It is at The Giant Pod on Twitter and Instagram. You can follow my Instagram as well at Andy_S1S. This podcast was produced by the Madchester lad, Harry Williams. We will see you next week on The Giant Pod. Thanks very much.